Stop for a moment. Not to be told who you are, not to be assigned a title, not to be elevated, reassured, or separated from others. Just stop long enough to notice what is actually happening inside you. This pause is deliberate. It is not meant to excite you or confirm anything about your importance. It is meant to interrupt autopilot. Most people move through their inner lives the same way they move through crowded streets, reacting, absorbing noise, borrowing urgency from whatever is loudest. A pause breaks that pattern. And what follows a true pause is not a declaration, but a question. Something may feel stirred in you, a sense of restlessness, heightened attention, or quiet pressure. Perhaps a subtle feeling that something is shifting even if you cannot yet name what. This experience is often misunderstood. It is frequently framed as evidence of uniqueness, destiny, or chosenness. But that interpretation skips a critical step and creates more confusion than clarity. Inner stirring is not rare. It is not a mark of superiority. It is a common feature of transition, whenever a person moves from one psychological, emotional, or existential phase into another. Awareness begins to reorganize. Old frameworks loosen, new questions emerge. The familiar starts to feel insufficient. This can happen at many points in life: after loss, after growth, after disillusionment, after prolonged effort, or after silence. The sensation is not proof of elevation. It is a signal of movement. If you have been told that feeling something deeply means you have been singled out, chosen, or set above others, it is important to slow down. Not because the experience is invalid, but because mislabeling it can derail what it is actually for. Sensitivity does not automatically imply destiny. Resonance does not automatically imply assignment. Resonance simply means something is touching an existing capacity. It means certain words, ideas, or silences interact with structures already present in you: your history, your temperament, your unresolved questions, your endurance. Two people can hear the same message. One feels nothing, the other feels everything. That difference does not indicate rank. It indicates readiness for reflection. Attention works the same way. When attention sharpens, perception widens. When perception widens, responsibility increases. But attention alone does not equal calling. Noticing something does not mean you are meant to act on it publicly, immediately, or at all. Many things are perceived for the sake of discernment, not deployment. This distinction matters because there is a subtle but dangerous leap many people are encouraged to make from awareness to identity, from sensation to status, from inner movement to external label. That leap feels empowering at first, but it quietly removes the most important part of the process: self-examination. This message is not here to confirm who you are. It is here to ask how you are responding. There is a difference between being drawn to an idea and being accountable to it. There is a difference between feeling stirred and being entrusted. There is a difference between recognizing depth and carrying weight. When those differences are ignored, awareness becomes entitlement instead of responsibility. Awareness does not place you above others. It places you under obligation to think more carefully, act more precisely, and avoid unnecessary harm. The more you see, the less casually you can move. The more clearly you perceive patterns, consequences, and impacts, the less room there is for impulsive certainty. This is why inner stirring often feels heavy rather than exhilarating. Not because something is wrong, but because awareness adds gravity. It removes the illusion of neutrality. You can no longer say, "I didn't know," or "I wasn't aware." Once perception expands, the cost of avoidance increases. Many people seek the feeling of being chosen because it promises relief. Relief from doubt, from ambiguity, from shared vulnerability. It offers a shortcut identity: special, protected, destined. But real transitions do not reduce ambiguity. They increase it. They do not simplify responsibility. They intensify it. If something in you is awakening, the first task is not to claim it, announce it, or define it. The first task is to examine yourself honestly, to ask uncomfortable questions, to notice where you want elevation instead of discipline, reassurance instead of refinement, recognition instead of responsibility. Self-examination is not glamorous. It does not feel powerful in the way motivational language does. But it is the only way awareness becomes useful rather than distorting. Without examination, sensitivity turns into projection. Insight turns into assumption. Attention turns into self-importance. This message is an invitation, not a verdict. An invitation to slow down instead of rushing to meaning, to hold the experience without immediately explaining it, to resist the urge to interpret resonance as proof of destiny. Transitions often begin quietly. They start as subtle mismatches between who you have been and what you can no longer ignore. They show up as dissatisfaction with old explanations, discomfort with borrowed identities, and a growing intolerance for superficial certainty. None of this means you are superior. It means you are changing, and change requires care. Care in how you interpret yourself. Care in how you relate to others. Care in how you act or choose not to act while clarity is still forming. Many people damage themselves and others by mistaking early awareness for final authority. Awareness is not the finish line. It is the beginning of accountability. If you feel more sensitive lately, that does not mean you are above the world. It means you are more exposed to it. If you feel more perceptive, it does not mean you are exempt from error. It means your errors will carry greater consequence. If you feel drawn to purpose, it does not mean your role is grand. It means your standards must be higher. Nothing in this moment requires you to decide who you are. Nothing requires you to declare what you are meant to do. Nothing requires you to separate yourself from others or claim a special status. What is required quietly, firmly, is honesty. Honesty about your motives, about where you want certainty instead of truth, about where you want to feel important instead of useful, about where you want to be seen instead of refined. Awareness does not entitle you to meaning. It demands that you earn it through restraint, integrity, and sustained attention. So if something is stirring in you, let it stir. Do not rush to crown it. Do not rush to explain it. Sit with it long enough to see what it asks of you, not what it promises you, because real alignment does not announce itself. It does not flatter, and it does not hurry to make you feel special. Humans instinctively search for meaning when certainty dissolves. This is not a flaw in human psychology. It is a survival mechanism. When structures that once provided stability, roles, beliefs, relationships, futures begin to weaken or fail, the mind looks for narrative. Meaning organizes chaos. It reduces anxiety by turning uncertainty into direction, even if that direction is provisional. In seasons of transition, loss, pressure, or rapid change, people are especially receptive to messages that explain what they are feeling and why it matters. This is the context in which language about purpose, destiny, and hidden greatness becomes so powerful. It does not enter a neutral mind. It enters a searching one. The phrase hidden greatness is particularly effective because it offers two things at once: hope and relief. Hope because it reframes struggle as preparation rather than failure. Relief because it suggests that confusion, pain, or stagnation are not signs of inadequacy but evidence of something meaningful forming beneath the surface. For someone who feels unseen, delayed, or uncertain, this language provides immediate psychological stabilization. It says, "You are not lost, you are becoming." That message can be profoundly comforting, especially when external validation is absent or when traditional markers of success no longer feel accessible or relevant. This does not automatically make such messages manipulative or false. In fact, many people genuinely do carry unrealized capacity. Many lives are constrained not by lack of potential, but by fear conditioning, trauma, or limited opportunity. Language that names dormant ability can help people reconnect with parts of themselves they have ignored or suppressed. It can reawaken agency. It can interrupt resignation. Used responsibly, it can motivate reflection, courage, and growth. The danger is not in the idea that people have more within them than they are currently expressing. The danger lies in how quickly that idea is turned into identity rather than inquiry. When hidden greatness is presented as a conclusion rather than a hypothesis, it short-circuits discernment. Instead of asking, what capacities do I need to develop and what responsibilities come with them, the listener is encouraged to assume I already am something special. This subtle shift changes the psychological function of the message. It stops being an invitation to grow and becomes a consolation prize for uncertainty. The discomfort of not knowing who one is or where one is going is replaced with a ready-made explanation. I feel this way because I am destined for more. That explanation may soothe anxiety, but it can also delay the harder work of alignment. Motivation and alignment operate very differently, even though they often use similar language. Motivation is concerned with emotional movement. It seeks to energize, uplift, reassure, and inspire action by increasing confidence or desire. It answers the question, how do I feel? Alignment, on the other hand, is concerned with coherence between perception values, behavior, and consequence. It answers the question, how do I live responsibly with what I see? Motivation can exist without accuracy. Alignment cannot. You can feel motivated and still be misaligned, acting from ego, fear, imitation, or urgency rather than clarity. Messages centered on hidden greatness often prioritize motivation over alignment. They aim to counter despair by inflating possibility. Again, this is not inherently wrong, but without grounding, such messages can create an imbalance, heightened self-perception without corresponding discipline, humility, or service. When people are told they are powerful before they are prepared, sensitive before they are regulated, or chosen before they are accountable, the result is often confusion rather than growth. They may feel energized but directionless, validated but unstable, certain but untested. Alignment requires a slower process. It asks whether the meaning you are drawn to actually corresponds with your capacity to carry it. It examines whether your desire for purpose is matched by your willingness to be refined, corrected, and constrained. Alignment is less concerned with how special you feel and more concerned with how accurately you respond to reality. It does not promise immediate relief. In fact, it often increases discomfort by removing flattering interpretations and exposing responsibility. Where motivation says, "You are more than this," alignment asks, then, what must change in how you live? This is why messages of hidden greatness must be handled carefully. Not because they are entirely wrong, but because they are incomplete. They speak to possibility without always addressing cost. They validate longing without always interrogating motive. They awaken identity without always emphasizing restraint. For someone in uncertainty, that imbalance can be tempting. It offers elevation without examination, but lasting growth does not come from feeling special. It comes from becoming coherent, from allowing insight to reshape habits, priorities, and relationships, not just self-concept. Meaning-seeking is human. Hope is necessary. Identity relief can be stabilizing, but alignment asks more than belief. It asks response. It does not begin with declaring who you are, but with noticing what is being asked of you now, quietly, specifically, and often without applause. When messages about greatness lead you toward humility, discipline, and service, they support alignment. When they lead you toward comparison, entitlement, or exemption from accountability, they distort it. The distinction is not in the words used, but in the direction they point you inward, toward self-examination, or upward, toward self-inflation. To redefine chosen accurately, it must be separated from favoritism and rescued from ego. Being chosen is not about being elevated above others. It is about being positioned through readiness. No one is selected because they are more valuable, more loved, or more worthy as a person. Selection in any serious sense is functional. It answers the question, who is able to carry this without distortion? In that way, chosenness is not a complement to identity, but a consequence of capacity. It is less about who you are and more about what you can hold, sustain and execute without collapsing or abusing what has been placed in your care. Positioning happens quietly and over time. It is formed through exposure to pressure, through endurance, through learning restraint where impulse would have been easier. People who are chosen in this sense are rarely spared difficulty. They are often shaped by it. Readiness is not enthusiasm, talent, or even insight alone. It is the ability to remain coherent under weight. Many people desire influence, clarity, or purpose. Fewer are willing or able to carry the responsibility that accompanies them. Selection is therefore not exclusionary by intention, but practical by necessity. Responsibility must land somewhere. It lands where it can be carried. This is why no one is chosen above others. There is no hierarchy of human worth involved. There are only differing points of readiness at particular moments in time. Others may be just as capable in the future or capable in different ways or called to different forms of responsibility altogether. The language of favoritism collapses under scrutiny because it assumes that chosenness is a reward. It is not. It is an assignment. And assignments are not distributed based on preference, but on fit. When that distinction is lost, chosenness becomes an identity badge instead of a burden. And that is where distortion begins. Awareness is the turning point that removes neutrality. Before awareness, there is plausible innocence. You can claim not to know. You can move unconsciously. You can participate passively in systems, habits, or relationships without fully grasping their implications. Once awareness arrives, once you see patterns, consequences, or truths you cannot unsee, neutrality disappears. You are no longer simply existing, you are responding or refusing to respond. Accountability begins not when action is taken, but when perception sharpens. To see and do nothing is still a choice, and awareness makes that choice visible. This is why being entrusted often increases burden rather than comfort. When something is placed in your care, whether insight, influence, skill, or responsibility, you inherit its consequences. You become responsible not only for what you do, but for what you allow, ignore, or mishandle. Comfort depends on simplicity and limited scope. Entrustment expands scope. It complicates decisions. It introduces trade-offs that did not exist before. It demands restraint where indulgence once felt harmless, and courage where silence once felt safe. Many people romanticize being chosen because they imagine recognition relief or escape from struggle. In reality, true entrustment removes exits. It narrows options rather than expanding them. It clarifies what you can no longer do without violating what you now know. That is why readiness matters more than desire. Desire reaches for benefit. Readiness accepts cost. To be chosen is not to be spared. It is to be accountable. Not to be elevated above others, but to be positioned where response is required. And once positioned, comfort is no longer the measure of alignment. Integrity is. The phrase hidden gifts is often misunderstood because it suggests rarity, mystique, or special endowment bestowed selectively on a few. In reality, what people call hidden gifts are more accurately underdeveloped capacities. Human faculties shaped slowly and often painfully through lived experience. They are not exotic traits reserved for an elite class, but natural functions of perception, sensitivity, endurance, and pattern recognition that become refined under specific conditions. What makes them appear rare is not their existence, but their cost. Most people possess the raw material for these capacities. Far fewer are willing or able to sustain the pressure required for them to mature. Sensitivity is one of the most misunderstood of these capacities. It is often framed as weakness, emotional fragility, or overreaction. In truth, sensitivity is a high-resolution intake system. It detects nuance, subtle shifts in tone, inconsistencies between words and behavior, and emotional undercurrents that others overlook. This level of perception requires an open nervous system, which is precisely why it is costly. To remain sensitive without becoming overwhelmed demands regulation, boundaries, and discipline. Many people blunt their sensitivity through distraction, cynicism, or emotional numbing because the world rewards toughness more visibly than awareness. As a result, sensitivity is not rare, but sustained sensitivity is. Perception functions similarly. It is not mystical insight, but the ability to see relationships between events, motivations beneath actions, and consequences before they fully materialize. Perceptive individuals often arrive at conclusions without being able to immediately articulate how they got there, which leads others to dismiss or mistrust their insights. What is actually happening is accelerated synthesis. The brain is integrating past experience, present cues, and probabilistic outcomes into a coherent assessment. This capacity is built through exposure to complexity, contradiction, and repeated observation over time. It is honed not in comfort, but in environments where paying attention was necessary for survival, belonging, or stability. Endurance is perhaps the least romanticized, but most essential of these capacities. It is not merely the ability to withstand hardship, but the ability to remain coherent while doing so. Endurance develops when exit is not immediately available, when quitting, numbing, or outsourcing responsibility is not an option. People who develop deep endurance often do so without applause. Their strength is quiet, internal, and cumulative. They learn how to carry weight without collapsing into bitterness or spectacle. This capacity is costly because it requires delayed relief. In a culture oriented toward immediate gratification, endurance appears extraordinary simply because it is no longer common practice. Pattern recognition ties these capacities together. It is the ability to notice repetition across time, to see how personal experiences mirror collective ones, and to detect structural causes beneath individual events. Pattern recognition emerges when someone has lived through enough cycles, failure and recovery, trust and betrayal, effort and consequence to recognize form beneath chaos. This capacity often develops in people who are forced to mature early, who navigated instability, or who had to make sense of adult dynamics without adequate guidance. Again, this is not rare in origin, but rare in refinement. Many people experience patterns. Fewer stay with them long enough to understand them. What unites these capacities is not innate superiority, but sustained exposure to pressure. Pressure acts as a refining agent. It forces prioritization, strips away excess, and demands adaptation. Affirmation, by contrast, stabilizes existing identity but rarely expands capacity. Praise can encourage, but it does not stretch. Validation can soothe, but it does not restructure. Growth occurs when an individual must reorganize themselves to meet demands that exceed their current framework. This reorganization is uncomfortable, often disorienting, and frequently misunderstood by others. This is why people with underdeveloped capacities often experience a sense of being different long before they understand why. They may feel out of sync with their peers, resistant to superficial incentives, or burdened by an undefined responsibility. Without context, these sensations are easily misinterpreted as pathology or ego. In reality, they are signs of a system under load, adapting in real time. The individual is not being elevated, they are being conditioned. What looks like hidden giftedness from the outside often feels like pressure, confusion, or restraint from the inside. The cost of sustaining these capacities is ongoing. Sensitivity requires boundaries to prevent burnout. Perception demands humility to avoid arrogance. Endurance requires meaning to prevent despair. Pattern recognition requires courage to act on what is seen even when it disrupts comfort or belonging. These costs do not disappear once the capacity is developed. They become part of its maintenance. This is why many people unconsciously choose to abandon or dull these capacities. The relief is immediate, and the loss is subtle enough to be rationalized. It is important to distinguish between potential and responsibility. Possessing the raw capacity for sensitivity, perception, endurance, or pattern recognition does not automatically confer purpose or authority. Capacity is neutral until it is directed. Without discipline, these traits can devolve into anxiety, hypervigilance, rigidity, or detachment. Pressure alone does not ennoble, it merely reveals. What matters is how the individual responds to that revelation. Development requires intentional integration, learning how to use these capacities in service of clarity rather than control, contribution rather than superiority. This reframing dismantles the myth of hidden gifts as markers of special identity. There is nothing inherently elevating about having been shaped by pressure. There is only responsibility to use what has been developed with care. The true distinction is not who has capacity, but who is willing to carry it without exploiting it for validation or escape. In this sense, capacity expands through pressure, not because pressure is virtuous, but because it is unavoidable. Life applies it unevenly, and those who adapt without losing integrity emerge changed. Ultimately, what people call hidden gifts are simply the byproducts of sustained engagement with reality. They are the skills developed when someone stays present in difficulty long enough to learn from it. They are costly because they require exposure, patience, and restraint. They are not rare because few possess them, but because few protect and refine them once they appear. And they do not signify elevation. They signify readiness to see clearly, to endure honestly, and to respond responsibly when pressure inevitably returns. Hardship is often misread as proof of destiny. People look back at suffering and assume it must have been assigned, scripted, or guaranteed to produce a specific outcome. This interpretation is understandable. It gives pain a narrative and relieves uncertainty, but it is not accurate. Hardship does not equal destiny. Many people suffer and are not transformed by it. Many endure pressure and do not become clearer, wiser, or more capable. What hardship can do when met correctly is increase bandwidth, the internal capacity to perceive more, hold more, and respond with greater precision. Bandwidth is not purpose. It is preparation potential. Whether it becomes usable depends entirely on how pain is integrated. Bandwidth refers to the range of complexity a person can process without distortion. Someone with limited bandwidth needs simplicity, certainty, and control. Ambiguity feels threatening. Discomfort feels destabilizing. Someone with expanded bandwidth can hold contradiction, uncertainty, and tension without collapsing into reaction. They can pause instead of panic, observe instead of immediately judge, and choose instead of compulsively respond. This expansion does not happen through affirmation or comfort. It happens when life demands more than the existing system can handle, forcing adaptation at a structural level. Pain is one of the most efficient pressures for this kind of adaptation. It strips away illusion quickly. When something hurts, attention sharpens. Priorities reorder. Superficial concerns lose urgency. Pain forces contact with reality in a way few other experiences do. This is why pain can refine discernment. Discernment is not moral judgment or intellectual analysis. It is the ability to sense what matters, what is misaligned, and what is no longer sustainable. Pain teaches discernment by making consequences unavoidable. It shows what drains energy, what fractures integrity, and what cannot be carried forward. Patience is another capacity refined by hardship. Not passive waiting, but the ability to remain steady without immediate resolution. Pain often removes the illusion of quick fixes. It confronts people with timelines they cannot control and outcomes they cannot force. In this space, impatience becomes expensive. Reactivity creates more damage. Over time, those who survive without hardening learn restraint, how to hold desire without acting prematurely, how to wait without numbing, how to endure without fantasizing escape. This patience is not learned through instruction. It is earned through repeated contact with limits. Restraint is perhaps the most misunderstood outcome of pain. Many assume pain produces aggression, bitterness, or withdrawal. Sometimes it does. But when pain is integrated rather than resisted, it produces restraint, the capacity to hold power without discharging it impulsively. Restraint is not suppression. It is the ability to feel intensity without being ruled by it. People who have endured significant hardship and remained internally intact often develop this quality. They do not rush to speak, prove, or dominate. They understand the cost of misusing force, whether emotional, verbal, or positional. This makes them trustworthy in ways that charisma never can. This is where the confusion around feeling called begins. Many people experience an inner stirring during or after hardship. They sense increased perception, heightened sensitivity, or a pull toward meaning. Without proper framing, this stirring is interpreted as destiny or selection. The logic goes, I suffered deeply, therefore I must be meant for something extraordinary. The feeling is real, but the conclusion is premature. What has increased is not assignment, but capacity potential. Pain has widened the internal aperture, but that aperture is still undirected. Feeling called is common because pressure exposes capacity. When someone realizes they can perceive more than others, endure more than others, or see patterns others miss, it creates a sense of difference. Difference easily turns into identity. Identity easily turns into entitlement. This is where many people stall. They mistake awareness for readiness and sensitivity for authority. They feel chosen, but they are not prepared. Preparation is not about intensity of experience. It is about coherence of response. Unpreparedness shows up in predictable ways. The person speaks before listening fully. They act before understanding the system they are entering. They seek recognition rather than responsibility. They confuse emotional charge with truth and urgency with alignment. Often, ego quietly attaches itself to suffering, turning pain into a credential rather than a teacher. This is why so many people feel called but remain ineffective. Their capacity exists, but it is unusable because it is not yet disciplined. Endurance without ego is the key distinction. Endurance alone is not enough. Many people endure while secretly narrating themselves as superior, overlooked, or owed. This internal posture corrupts capacity. Ego turns sensitivity into reactivity, perception into suspicion, endurance into martyrdom. The person may still appear strong, but their strength leaks. They require validation. They interpret resistance as persecution. They lose adaptability. Their bandwidth narrows again, not because pain was insufficient, but because ego closed the system. Endurance without ego looks different. It does not advertise itself. It does not demand meaning prematurely. It allows pain to refine rather than define. This kind of endurance stays curious instead of defensive. It remains teachable even when it knows more than others. It can hold leadership potential without insisting on leadership position. It understands that being able to carry weight does not automatically mean it is time to lift publicly. Usable capacity is quiet. It does not rush to prove relevance. It is stable under stress and boring under praise. It can receive correction without collapse and responsibility without inflation. This is why many people with real bandwidth remain invisible for long periods. Visibility is not the measure of readiness. Consistency is. Integrity is. The ability to remain aligned when no one is watching is what makes capacity deployable when it matters. Hardship increases bandwidth by expanding internal space. What fills that space determines the outcome. If it fills with resentment, comparison, or fantasy, capacity becomes distorted. If it fills with clarity, humility, and restraint, capacity becomes functional. Destiny is not assigned through pain. Destiny, if the word is even useful, is shaped through response. Two people can endure similar suffering and emerge entirely differently. The difference is not what happened to them, but how they carried it. This reframing is important because it removes both despair and arrogance. It frees people from believing their pain guarantees purpose, and it frees them from believing their pain was meaningless. Pain increases what you can hold. It does not decide what you will do with it. That decision is ongoing, incremental, and often unglamorous. It happens in how you speak when you could dominate, how you wait when you could force, and how you serve when no recognition follows. In the end, capacity that matters is not the kind that feels powerful, but the kind that can be trusted. Trustworthiness is built when endurance is paired with humility, when perception is paired with discipline, and when sensitivity is paired with restraint. This is what makes bandwidth usable. Not the depth of suffering, but the quality of integration. Not the feeling of being called, but the willingness to be formed long after the feeling fades. Intuition is often treated as an authority, a voice that must be obeyed immediately and without question. In times of uncertainty, people lean on it as proof of direction, assuming that a strong inner sense must mean certainty, permission, or inevitability. But intuition is not a command. It is a signal. Like any signal, it requires interpretation, context, and structure to become useful. Without those, intuition does not lead to clarity. It amplifies fantasy projection and unresolved desire. At its core, intuition is sensitivity to subtle information. It registers shifts before logic catches up. It notices patterns, emotional undercurrents, and inconsistencies that are not yet fully conscious. This makes intuition valuable but also dangerous. Sensitivity without containment magnifies whatever already exists internally. If fear dominates intuition, feels like threat. If desire dominates intuition, feels like destiny. If ego dominates intuition, feels like superiority. The signal itself is neutral. The internal environment determines how it is translated. This is why intuition must never be confused with instruction. Instruction implies direction, timing, and responsibility. Intuition offers none of these by itself. It only points. When people treat intuition as a command, they skip discernment. They act before testing, commit before stabilizing, and speak before grounding. The result is often chaos disguised as authenticity. What feels like boldness is actually reactivity. What feels like faith is often impatience. Without structure, intuition amplifies fantasy. Fantasy is not imagination. It is imagination untethered from reality. It fills gaps with meaning that has not been earned. Fantasy thrives in ambiguity and feeds on emotional charge. Intuition provides raw data, but fantasy interprets it prematurely. A fleeting sense becomes a narrative. A moment of resonance becomes identity. A perceived possibility becomes obligation. Over time, the person is no longer listening. They are reinforcing a story they want to be true. Structure is what separates intuition from delusion. Structure does not suppress intuition. It tests it. It asks whether the signal remains consistent over time, whether it aligns with reality, whether it demands responsibility rather than validation. Structure includes discipline, feedback, accountability, and patience. It requires slowing down enough to see whether intuition deepens or dissipates. Signals that are real grow quieter and clearer with time. Signals that are fantasy-driven grow louder and more urgent. True clarity does not shout. It does not rush. It does not demand immediate action or recognition. As clarity increases, noise decreases. The internal environment becomes less crowded with competing impulses. Decisions feel simpler not because life is simple, but because distraction has been reduced. This is why clarity often feels underwhelming at first. It lacks drama. It does not flatter identity. It does not promise exemption from effort or consequence. It simply points to what must be done next, often quietly and without spectacle. People accustomed to emotional stimulation often mistrust this quiet. They associate truth with intensity and meaning with urgency. When clarity arrives without fireworks, they assume something is missing. In reality, what is missing is inflation. True clarity removes excess. It strips away unnecessary options, explanations, and justifications. It narrows focus. This narrowing can feel like loss to the ego, which prefers expansion, visibility, and specialness. But narrowing is not diminishment. It is precision. Alignment operates through this narrowing. Alignment is not about becoming more than others. It is about becoming coherent within oneself. When aligned thoughts, values, and actions stop pulling in different directions, energy stops leaking into comparison, proving, and second-guessing. This coherence creates stability. It allows sustained effort without burnout and influence without force. Alignment does not inflate identity. It stabilizes it. The sense of self becomes less performative and more grounded. This is why alignment often feels less exciting than misalignment. Misalignment produces friction, which generates intensity. Alignment reduces friction, which produces calm. Calm is easily mistaken for stagnation by those addicted to stimulation. But calm is what allows endurance. Calm is what allows listening. Calm is what allows responsibility to be carried without distortion. In aligned states, people stop asking who they are supposed to be and start attending to what needs to be done. Intuition plays a role here, but a contained one. It alerts, it nudges, it highlights, then it steps back. When intuition is healthy, it does not compete with reason or discipline. It cooperates with them. Reason provides structure. Discipline provides consistency. Intuition provides sensitivity. Remove any one of these and the system destabilizes. Overemphasize intuition and fantasy takes over. Overemphasize structure and rigidity suffocates perception. Overemphasize discipline and responsiveness is lost. Balance is what makes clarity sustainable. One of the clearest signs of misused intuition is identity inflation. This happens when people attach meaning to themselves rather than to responsibility. They begin to see themselves as different, elevated, or separate, not in function, but in worth. Language shifts subtly from "I'm being guided to do this" to "I am someone who sees what others don't." The focus moves from service to self-concept. This is where intuition becomes intoxicating. It feeds a sense of exception rather than obligation. Alignment corrects this by redirecting attention outward. When aligned, the question is no longer, "What does this say about me?" but "What does this require of me?" Responsibility replaces self-image. Consequence replaces fantasy. The work becomes central and the self recedes into proper proportion. This does not erase identity. It grounds it. The person knows who they are without needing constant confirmation. Another misunderstanding is the belief that intuition should expand options. People assume clarity brings more possibilities, more doors, more expressions of self. Often the opposite is true. As clarity increases, many options fall away, not because they are bad, but because they are unnecessary. Focus tightens, energy consolidates. This can feel restrictive to someone equating freedom with variety. In reality, this narrowing is what makes depth possible. Depth requires saying no to many things in order to say yes fully to one. This narrowing also exposes attachment. When options close, whatever was fueling distraction becomes visible. Fear of missing out, fear of insignificance, fear of commitment all surface. This is where many people retreat, mistaking discomfort for misalignment. They reopen options, seek new signals, chase new intuitions. The cycle continues. Alignment demands staying. It demands letting clarity do its pruning work without interference. It is important to note that intuition does not disappear in aligned states. It becomes subtler. Instead of dramatic impressions, it manifests as steady knowing. Instead of emotional highs, it produces quiet confidence. Instead of urgency, it produces timing. This quieter intuition is easier to ignore, which is why discipline matters. Discipline creates the space in which subtle signals can be noticed. Without it, only the loudest impulses register. Over time, people who honor intuition as a signal rather than a command develop discernment. They learn which signals repeat, which fade, and which distort under scrutiny. They stop romanticizing inner experiences and start integrating them. Their lives become less performative and more effective. They are not constantly announcing insight or chasing confirmation. They move when movement is required and wait when waiting is necessary. Alignment, then, is not a feeling state. It is a condition of coherence. It is measured not by intensity, but by sustainability. Can you remain consistent without external reinforcement? Can you act responsibly without immediate reward? Can you hold clarity without turning it into identity? These questions matter more than how strongly something is felt. In the end, intuition is a beginning, not an ending. It opens inquiry. It does not close it. It invites attention. It does not demand allegiance. When honored properly, intuition leads toward clarity. When misused, it leads toward inflation. True clarity simplifies. It quiets the internal noise. It narrows focus. And in doing so, it creates the conditions for alignment, not as a badge of specialness, but as a lived discipline of coherence, responsibility, and grounded action. Social validation often disrupts internal calibration because it introduces an external reference point before an internal one has stabilized. When attention arrives too early, it interferes with discernment. Instead of listening inwardly to refine judgment, the individual begins adjusting to feedback, reaction, and expectation. What could have matured into grounded authority becomes shaped by applause, resistance, or comparison. Internal calibration requires quiet repetition, not response. It depends on subtle feedback loops that are easily overridden when external voices become louder than internal signals. Attention distorts undeveloped responsibility because visibility amplifies pressure without increasing capacity. Responsibility matures through containment, making decisions without witnesses, correcting errors without defense, and holding consistency without recognition. When attention arrives before responsibility is embodied, behavior shifts from principled to performative. Choices are no longer guided by what is correct, but by what will be perceived as correct. This creates fragility. The individual becomes reactive to opinion, and authority turns brittle because it relies on reinforcement rather than coherence. Many processes require privacy to stabilize because formation is inherently inefficient at first. Early stages involve contradiction, uncertainty, and repeated correction. These are not flaws, they are necessary friction points. Privacy provides protection during this phase. It allows experimentation without identity, risk failure without shame, and refinement without explanation. When processes are exposed too early, there is pressure to resolve ambiguity prematurely. People rush conclusions, solidify positions, and harden identities before understanding has fully formed. What needed time becomes fixed too soon. Privacy is not secrecy born of fear. It is stewardship born of respect. It recognizes that not everything benefits from interpretation while still in motion. Growth stabilizes when it is allowed to progress without commentary. Once a process has integrated, once behavior, understanding, and responsibility align, exposure no longer destabilizes it. At that point, visibility becomes neutral rather than disruptive. Real authority becomes less demonstrative over time because it no longer needs to signal itself. Early authority often announces, explains, or asserts because it is still proving coherence. Mature authority operates quietly. It is recognizable through consistency, restraint, and timing rather than volume. The more integrated the authority, the less it relies on emphasis. Decisions are made without spectacle. Influence occurs without persuasion. Presence itself carries weight. This quieting is not passivity, it is density. Authority accumulates through repeated alignment between intention and action. As this alignment strengthens, the need for external validation diminishes. The individual no longer measures impact by reaction, but by outcome. Over time, authority shifts from something displayed to something felt. It is trusted not because it is visible, but because it is reliable. In this way, reduced demonstration is not loss of power, but evidence of it. When internal calibration is stable, attention becomes optional rather than necessary. Responsibility no longer seeks witnesses. Authority no longer seeks agreement. What is real stands without amplification, having been formed slowly, privately, and with enough integrity to endure exposure when the time is right. When internal calibration is still forming, silence is not absence. It is structure. Silence creates a closed loop in which feedback comes from reality rather than reaction. Each decision returns information directly to the individual: what worked, what failed, what felt aligned, what created friction. This loop is delicate. Social validation interrupts it by inserting interpretation before integration. Instead of learning from consequence, the individual learns from response. Over time, this conditions behavior toward approval rather than accuracy. What is rewarded is repeated even if it is misaligned. What is misunderstood is abandoned even if it is correct. Internal truth becomes negotiable. This is why early responsibility must often be carried invisibly. Responsibility is not proven by exposure, it is proven by consistency under no supervision. When no one is watching, shortcuts are tempting, discipline is tested, and motives are revealed. If responsibility holds under those conditions, it becomes trustworthy. If it requires observation to exist, it is not yet responsibility, it is compliance. True authority grows from the ability to govern oneself without external pressure. That ability cannot be trained in public. Attention also accelerates identity formation prematurely. When others label you, you begin to inhabit a role before understanding its weight. Identity hardens faster than capacity, and once identity hardens, learning slows. The individual defends the image rather than refining the function. This is one of the most subtle dangers of early validation. It freezes development. The person becomes known for something they have not yet mastered, and the fear of contradiction replaces curiosity. Growth requires the freedom to be unfinished. Processes that require privacy often involve contradictions that cannot yet be resolved. There may be impulses that conflict with values, insights that lack language, or responsibilities that outpace confidence. These tensions are not errors, they are indicators of expansion. But in public, contradiction is interpreted as inconsistency, and inconsistency is punished. To avoid that punishment, people simplify themselves. They choose coherence over truth, clarity over accuracy. Privacy protects complexity long enough for it to integrate. Over time, as internal alignment stabilizes, the relationship to attention changes. Attention is no longer destabilizing because it no longer informs identity. Feedback becomes data rather than direction. Praise does not inflate. Criticism does not collapse. The individual has already learned how to self-correct, so external input is supplemental, not foundational. At this stage, visibility no longer distorts responsibility because responsibility no longer depends on validation. This is also why mature authority often feels understated. It does not seek to convince because it does not doubt itself. It does not rush to speak because timing has become part of its intelligence. It does not react to misinterpretation because it understands that clarity unfolds through consistency, not explanation. Demonstration decreases as embodiment increases. What once needed articulation now operates implicitly. There is also a shift in how effort is applied. Early on, effort is loud because it is compensating for uncertainty. Later, effort becomes economical. Energy is conserved, not expended to prove worth. This conservation is not laziness. It is efficiency born of discernment. The individual learns where intervention matters and where restraint carries more power. Not everything requires response. Not every moment requires presence. Authority includes the ability to withhold as much as the ability to act. As responsibility matures, the individual becomes less interested in being seen and more interested in being accurate. Accuracy requires patience. It requires waiting for enough information, enough internal agreement, enough stability. This waiting is often misread as hesitation by those who equate speed with competence. But restraint is a form of intelligence. It recognizes that premature action can create more correction than delay. Another quiet shift occurs in motivation. Early motivation is often fueled by identity reinforcement, the desire to be meaningful, effective, recognized. Later, motivation becomes functional. Action is taken because it is necessary, not because it affirms self-concept. This reduces internal noise. When action is no longer tied to self-definition, it becomes cleaner. There is less emotional residue attached to outcomes. Success does not intoxicate. Failure does not devastate. Both are treated as information. This neutrality is frequently misunderstood as detachment, but it is actually commitment at a deeper level. The individual is committed to the work, not to how the work reflects on them. This is a critical distinction. When commitment shifts from self to function, authority becomes sustainable. Burnout decreases because effort is no longer fueled by ego. Consistency increases because motivation is no longer mood-dependent. Over time, people often notice that those with real authority speak less, not more. They ask better questions. They intervene precisely. They do not dominate space because they do not need to secure it. Their presence reorganizes environments subtly. Others adjust behavior without being told. This is not charisma. It is coherence. Coherence creates gravity. The path to this state is rarely linear. It involves periods of withdrawal that feel like regression and phases of invisibility that feel like erasure. But these are often recalibration phases. The system is updating. Old reference points are being removed. New standards are being internalized. From the outside, nothing appears to be happening. Internally, structure is being laid. If attention returns during these phases, it can destabilize the process. This is why many traditions emphasize hiddenness, obscurity, or wilderness periods, not as romantic suffering, but as necessary containment. Capacity must be built where it will not be distorted by feedback. Once capacity is embodied, it becomes resilient to observation. Ultimately, real authority is recognized not by how it presents itself, but by how little it needs to. It does not chase influence. Influence accumulates around it. It does not demand trust. Trust forms through reliability. It does not announce depth. Depth is felt through outcome. This is the quiet endpoint of internal calibration when the individual no longer needs the world to confirm what has already been integrated. At that point, attention can come or go without consequence. Visibility can increase without distortion. Responsibility can expand without collapse. The individual is no longer organized around response, but around alignment. And alignment, once stabilized, carries its own authority, silent, durable, and independent of recognition. Action without clarity burns capacity. This is not a metaphor, it is a structural reality. When movement is driven by urgency rather than alignment, energy is consumed faster than it can be regenerated. The individual may appear productive, decisive, even brave, but internally, something erodes. Focus fragments. Motivation thins. Discernment dulls. What burns is not effort, but capacity, the long-term ability to respond well. Capacity is finite when misused. Every action taken without internal coherence creates correction debt. Eventually, the system must stop to repair what speed damaged. This is why some people who move quickly stall permanently, while others who move slowly endure. Clarity does not mean having every answer. It means internal agreement. When intention, timing, and responsibility converge, action becomes economical. Less force is required because resistance is lower. Outcomes stabilize because they are not compensating for inner conflict. Without this agreement, action becomes noise. The system expends energy managing consequences rather than advancing purpose. Over time, the cost compounds. Burnout is often not the result of doing too much, but of doing what one was not ready to carry. Waiting, then, is not passivity when it is listening. There is a form of waiting that is avoidance delay motivated by fear, comfort, or indecision. But there is another form that is active alert and disciplined. Listening requires presence, it requires restraint, it requires the ability to hold tension without resolving it prematurely. This kind of waiting refines perception. Patterns become visible. Signals separate from static. What initially feels like ambiguity sharpens into direction. Listening waiting is not empty time. Internally, calibration is occurring. Values align with reality. Desire is filtered through responsibility. The system tests whether an impulse persists without stimulation. Many impulses fade when not acted upon immediately. Those that remain gain credibility. This is how discernment matures, not by accumulation of options, but by subtraction. Waiting exposes what is essential by allowing what is unnecessary to exhaust itself. Stillness and stagnation look similar on the surface, but they operate from opposite centers. Stillness is intentional containment. Stagnation is arrested movement caused by fear or depletion. Stillness holds energy in reserve. Stagnation leaks it. In stillness, attention is sharpened. In stagnation, attention collapses inward and becomes ruminative. One is quiet but alert. The other is quiet but numb. Knowing when restraint expires is one of the most advanced forms of discernment. Restraint has a lifespan. If held too long, it becomes suppression. If released too early, it becomes recklessness. The transition point is rarely dramatic. It does not announce itself with certainty or excitement. More often, it appears as a subtle shift. Resistance decreases, internal conflict quiets, and the same idea that once felt heavy now feels neutral. Not thrilling clear. This neutrality is important. When action is no longer emotionally charged, it is usually closer to correct timing. Many people miss this moment because they are waiting to feel confident, inspired, or fearless. But timing does not depend on emotion. Emotion is volatile. Timing is structural. A door can be open even when you are tired. A window can close even while you are excited. Those who rely on feeling ready often act late. Those who rely on clarity act precisely. Timing operates independently of excitement because excitement is about anticipation, not readiness. Anticipation imagines outcome. Readiness evaluates capacity. Excitement can coexist with unpreparedness. Clarity cannot. Clarity narrows focus. It removes excess motion. It reduces urgency. When timing aligns, action feels less dramatic than expected. There is no surge, only steadiness. This is also why delayed action is not always a failure, but missed timing often is. Delay that sharpens clarity increases future capacity. Delay that avoids responsibility erodes it. The difference is whether listening is occurring. Are you more precise now than before? More grounded? More restrained? Or simply more tired? More doubtful? More disconnected? One leads to aligned action. The other leads to decay. Action taken too early teaches the wrong lessons. The system learns to equate movement with progress and urgency with importance. Action taken too late teaches resignation. The system learns that responsiveness does not matter. Both distort judgment. Proper timing teaches something else entirely, that reality cooperates when alignment is present. Effort meets less resistance. Outcomes require less repair. Consequences are proportional rather than overwhelming. Stillness, when aligned, preserves optionality. It keeps multiple futures viable until one becomes necessary. Premature action collapses options. This is why restraint often feels powerful in hindsight. It protected paths that action would have closed. Stagnation, by contrast, reduces options without choosing any. It is erosion without direction. Ultimately, the discipline is not learning when to act, but learning how to wait without disengaging, to remain present without forcing, to hold readiness without rushing, to trust that timing is not an emotional state but an intersection between capacity, responsibility, and reality. When that intersection appears, action no longer burns capacity, it expresses it. Response is not scale, it is accuracy. In moments of perceived calling or inner urgency, the temptation is to measure faithfulness by size, how much is done, how visible it is, how strongly it announces itself. But accuracy operates on a different axis. Accuracy asks whether the response matches the instruction, not whether it impresses an audience or satisfies internal pressure. A precise response may be small, quiet, even unimpressive externally, yet still be fully aligned. Scale without accuracy creates noise. Accuracy, even when modest, creates momentum that can be sustained. This is why small disciplined action outweighs dramatic declaration. Declarations feel powerful because they release emotional energy. They create a sense of movement without requiring containment. But energy released without structure dissipates quickly. Disciplined action, by contrast, channels energy into form. It is repeatable. It survives mood fluctuations. It builds capacity rather than exhausting it. One well-chosen action carried out consistently does more to stabilize purpose than 10 passionate statements that cannot be maintained. Responsibility always begins internally before it becomes visible. Before something can be trusted externally, it must be governed internally. This includes attention, impulse, time, and motive. If these are unmanaged, external responsibility will amplify disorder rather than effectiveness. Internal responsibility is not glamorous. It looks like restraint, follow-through, and alignment when no one is watching. But it is the only environment in which real authority can grow without distortion. Many people seek visibility as proof of readiness, but visibility is a test, not a confirmation. What is unsteady internally becomes exaggerated externally. This is why premature exposure often destabilizes rather than advances development. The system has not yet learned to carry weight without compensation. Internal consistency must come first, not as delay, but as foundation. Consistency reveals readiness more reliably than confidence, because confidence can be situational, emotional, or performative. Consistency requires integration. It means values, behavior, and decision-making are aligned over time, not just in moments of intensity. Confidence may fluctuate without consequence. Consistency cannot. It exposes gaps quickly. It also builds trust internally first, then externally. Readiness is not proven by how boldly one speaks, but by how steadily one moves. By whether actions remain coherent under pressure. By whether responsibility is carried the same way when conditions are ordinary as when they are charged. When response is accurate, scale becomes irrelevant. Growth follows naturally, not because it is pursued, but because the structure can support it. Consistency over time clarifies what emotion cannot. When response is accurate, it removes the need for constant self-assessment or reassurance. You no longer ask whether you are ready. Your behavior answers that question for you. Readiness becomes observable through patterns, not proclamations. This is why alignment often feels uneventful. It does not spike adrenaline or create spectacle. It settles the system and reduces internal noise. Accuracy also requires humility because it often means responding in ways that feel smaller than the ego expects. The ego seeks expansion, recognition, and acceleration. Alignment seeks fit. It asks what is required now, not what would feel most validating. This can feel like contraction, but it is actually compression, a strengthening of form so that greater weight can be carried later without collapse. Over time, accurate response trains discernment. You begin to sense when movement is needed and when restraint is protective. You learn the difference between urgency and readiness, between momentum and pressure. This discernment is not dramatic, it is practical. It expresses itself in timing, pacing, and follow-through. When this internal discipline is established, growth becomes stable rather than volatile. Opportunity no longer overwhelms and delay no longer threatens identity. You move when it is time, and you wait when it is not, without anxiety, without performance. This is how responsibility matures into authority, quietly, consistently, and without distortion.